Dried flowers are back in style. No more of that dusty, dirty, 80s style dried flowers. Today I'm going to show you how to make a modern hoop wreath with bright, colorful, vibrant dried flowers. My name's Ellen Frost. I'm the owner of Local Color Flowers, and I've been a florist for over 15 years. I write a weekly newsletter all about flowers, which you should definitely check out because it's awesome. And I'm building a community of flower nerds online. Before we get started, let me just say, in case you're wondering, why do I look like this? I am covered in poison ivy, which means I have my hair up and nothing can touch my poison ivy. So in case you were wondering, that's why I look like this. All right, so the first thing to make a hoop wreath is to get a hoop. This is a goldish metal hoop. This is a 14-inch hoop. Usually I use a 12-inch, but today I'm going to use a 14-inch. You can also use any other sort of hoop. These are available just at a craft store. You could use a wood embroidery hoop like this one, or you could just make a hoop with something like willow or some other kind of branches. Today I'm going to be using this gold hoop, and the first thing I need to do is prepare my hoop. So as I'm looking at the hoop hanging, I'm going to make I call it like a half moon. I'm going to cover half of the hoop with flowers and the other half I'm going to leave open. And in order to prepare the hoop, I'm going to use some of this floral tape to cover the hoop because it can get slippery, and when you place the flowers on the hoop, they can slide and kind of move out of place. So I want to use this tape, which has a resin inside it, so that when I place the flowers on there, they'll really stay in place. So I'm just going to wrap where I want the flowers to be. If you were using something like a wood frame or even a frame that's made out of willow, you would not have to do this. You only have to do this if the frame is real slippery or glossy, just so that the flowers don't slide out of place. All right, once my hoop is prepared, I'm going to just set it aside while I make my bunches. So the big picture to make a wreath like this is to make many small boutonniere sized bunches and then wire them onto the frame. That's sort of the big picture. So I'm going to start by first taking down all of my dried flowers off of the ceiling where they're drying, and then I'm going to lay them out and I'm going to start making small bunches. And because I don't dry in bulk, I dry little bits and pieces of things. Not every little boutonniere size bunch is going to be exactly the same, and that's fine. If you're a person who likes more of a pattern, you can do more of a pattern, but really, as long as it's in the same color palette family, I think for me that's great. So some of the materials I'm using today, I'm going to start with, this is statice, and statice is like one of the easiest flowers to dry because it's basically dry when you cut it off the plant. So I'm going to use some statice. I'm also going to use some money plant. This is Lunaria. This is a great, really sought after dried flower. And you can see I just have them cut short, and I'm going to make this little bunch in my hand. I'm using some Gomphrena, some Cresspedia. These are billy balls. These are all flowers that dry really easily. So I'm just putting together a little bunch. I'm going to use some sunflower blooms. That's going to be sort of my focal flower in this little bouquet. And then I'm going to use some straw flower. Straw flower is great. I can never get enough straw flower for dried arrangements because they dry great and they keep their color just terrific. So once I have my little bouquet together, this is maybe 6-7 stems, something like that. You can make it larger or smaller depending on how sort of robust you want the wreath to feel. But this is about the size I would use. So I'm going to just trim them down a little. And then to attach it, I'm going to use that same floral tape. And you could use something else like bind wire or twine. You could even skip binding it together if you wanted to try that. But I find that because the stems are kind of brittle, that this tape gives them a little protection for when I start to wire it onto the frame. They're less likely to break if they have a little bit of this little buffer on them. All right, so I'm just going to trim these down. I'll show you one more. I'm going to use some Dusty Miller in this one. Dusty Miller is also great dried. This is the round leaf one. And I'm also going to use some marigolds. Marigolds, another flower that we use dried all the time. So you can see I'm using some of the same color palette family, using that Status again, the Cresspedia, a little Gomphrena, and some straw flower. And like I said, every one of these bunches does not have to be exactly the same. As long as they are in the same color palette family, that will be great. So I'm gonna trim this and then tape these up. You can hear how crunchy they are. Dried flowers are very delicate, so you do just have to be a little more careful when you're using them because they do tend to be fragile and have, tendency to break. Once you have all of your bunches made, you're gonna have to test out how many you need. I would say for a 14-inch frame, maybe you need between 8 and 12, just depending on how big you make the little bouquets. So I'm gonna start at the top of my wreath. So if my wreath were gonna hang like this, I'm gonna start at the top and I'm gonna work my way down. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna place the bunch right on the wreath frame. And then I'm gonna use some bind wire. If you've never used bind wire before, it's just wire that has a paper coating on it. And that paper coating is what helps, I think, again, give a little buffer to these dried stems so that they don't fray and they don't get damaged. And you can cut the bind wire off and then attach it again later if you want, if that's easier. So I want to make sure it's nice and tight on there. All right, then I'm going to take my next bunch. I'm going to place it right below the first one so that they're really just crossed over on top of each other. And then I'm going to wire this one on. And then you're going to do that for all of your little bouquets. Place them right on there. Wrap your bind wire. So as I get to my last bunch, I want to just make sure that that is wired on nice and tight. And you can make a little loop and tie a knot right at the end to make sure it stays tight on there. I like to choose for a ribbon something that's kind of flowy, especially for a color palette like this where it has a little bit more of a whimsical feel. So I'm just going to tie on the end here. Make sure your ends of your ribbons are cut nice and clean. I like to cut them at an angle. Just gives a little bit of a finishing feel to it. And I might use 2 ribbons just to give it a little extra interest. And there you have it. This is a modern hoop wreath with bright, colorful dried flowers. If you're curious about what flowers I like to dry, you can check out in the notes. I have my top 10 flowers for drying. Definitely check that out and try drying yourself.